Hello, friends, and welcome to Tim Kirby Rush. I, veteran political analyst and radio talk show host Tim Kirby, tell you about how the world looks through a Russian lens. I am here, after all. So, anyways, our guest today is Dr. Eamon McKinney, and he is someone who has made some major business deals in China. He has introduced brands and done deals for companies like Ford, Microsoft, IBM, Boeing, and even some luxury cars. Maybe you can hook me up with one of them. But anyways, he's a man who knows what China looks like on the inside, and he's going to talk to us about our overall topic, the global economic shift towards Asia. So that's going to be our big topic with Dr. McKinney coming up very soon. But for now, let's talk about this global economic shift through a little bit of a Russian filter. Now, over the last few years, I'm sure we've all seen somewhere the little maps that show how in the past, the global economic center of activity, or whatever they want to call it, which used to be very rooted deeply in Europe, keeps moving more and more east. Asia tends to have more and more economic activity, whereas the West is kind of stalling. But overall, there's something very important to note about this map. When we look at it, it really shows that there's sort of two major economic centers that go back to basically almost the beginning of writing. We have sort of Europe and the Mediterranean, so that would also include, like ancient Egypt as part of the Mediterranean, and we have sort of Southeast Asia, be it China, India, and so on. And really, it's kind of interesting that the economic center of the world always sort of goes between these two positions, something we should think about from a geopolitical standpoint. But if my little hot take here that there are two economic centers of the world and the sort of center point between them goes back and forth, well, that leads to having some certain advantages for the groups of people who happen to be between those poles. We've got the Turks, and the Arabs, and the Iranians, and of course, the Russians, who now, after I believe the 8th round of the mother of all sanctions, definitely are very happy to see the global financial world shift further towards Asia and farther away from the countries that constantly want to punish them. So probably many of you do know, but maybe some of you don't know that essentially, your Visa, your MasterCard, all these different bank wire transfers essentially used one mechanism, one system to work. And that system is called SWIFT. Now, countries like Iran, who don't play ball, got turned off of SWIFT a long time ago, or maybe were never even allowed to join it in the first place. And recently, Russia has suffered the same fate. But the Russians have had a long time to prepare for what was coming in the Ukraine and the upcoming challenges, and so they have set up sort of their own system. You've probably heard about it. It's called Mir, at least within Russia, but it actually has a sort of special name for abroad now. But now the head of VTB Bank revealed that the SPFS system is open for fair use for any one of the BRICS countries. Essentially, it's kind of like an open source alternative to SWIFT for anyone who's in BRICS. Go nuts, use it. Let's trade between each other. Uh-oh. Oh, guys, again, this sort of economic news, sometimes it never hits quite as hard as something that's more visceral, but essentially as of a few months ago, we were living in a world where there was one Western-controlled system to send money internationally for governments, businesses. That was one hell of a monopoly, and now it's gone because of supporting Kiev. Now the Russians have come up with this sort of, I could call it open source. Maybe that's not the proper term. There's probably some computer programmer out there who's angry at me. But it kind of feels open source, and it's available for anyone to use within the BRICS system. And guess what? They're already starting to use it. The Chinese are already starting to use it. It's already spreading. So in a lot of ways, it's too late. If we're talking about something being a very multipolar world, well, money transfers just got a lot more multipolar, and it's just going to keep going from there. Okay, guys, enough of my silliness. Here is Dr. Eamon McKinney, who is going to talk to us about his expertise making hundreds of business deals within China, with the Chinese, and about the big economic shift that we are experiencing right now. Dr. McKinney, is this Belt and Road Initiative thing actually happening? Over the years, I've heard a lot of hype for it. But I've heard a lot of hype for a lot of things, like that whole Elon Musk guy, He's talking about taking a rocket ship from California to New Zealand, self-driving taxis, Hyperloop trains, and all this stuff, and guess what? None of it comes to be. So, is this Belt and Road Initiative thing actually happening, functioning? And is anyone out there trying to stop it?
Well, yes, taking the last question first, somebody's absolutely trying to stop it. I mean, if you look at the empire model best exemplified by the British Empire, the very last thing they wanted was countries to link up with each other. Internal development is something the empire didn't want. They don't want people connecting. You know, Russia and China and Iran, for example, getting together to form a bloc is something that Brzezinski spoke about. That was the worst case scenario in their plans for the the continuance of the unipolar world as it was then. So this is a real threat to the USA. This is a real threat to the empire, and they are doing everything they can stop it everywhere they can. If you look, there's been any number of flare-ups all along the Belt and Road. And then we had obviously the Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, that again is a very important link. Obviously, Pakistan is an important link. They're continually trying to destabilize the Xinjiang region, which the Xinjiang region where the Uyghurs are, that's the very northwest of China. And that's where all the traffic that goes to Europe and Central Asia comes through. So that's an area that they're seriously trying to destabilize and have been for years and years and years. The problem, the Belt and Road is a fabulous idea. People really don't understand it because, like in Western think, we have this win-lose, zero-sum game mentality. They don't have that in China. When they talk about win-win cooperation, they sincerely mean it for good reasons. It's just better business. Both sides want the same thing, but for different reasons. And people are suspicious about the motives of it. Now, it's not altruistic, the Belt and Road. China's very clear about what it wants out of it, and it's very upfront about it. It's not in any way hidden. It's all transparent, you know. It's not altruistic, but it's not nefarious either. And it makes sense. I think there's close to 150 countries that have signed on now. And if you look at it, those 150 countries all have a different role to play. China is not doing the same thing in all these countries. It's depending on what the need of the country is, what they can afford to do, and what looks like a development project. So it doesn't get very positive publicity in the West, but it's a very popular project to developing countries. This is the first opportunity they've had to have real development capital ever. I mean, they can borrow money for the IMF to pay the IMF back, but there's never any development capital. If you take Sri Lanka, for example, about 10% of Sri Lanka's debt is owed to China. The difference is that was actually to build a port to improve and develop the economy. So, they're actually building something of real value that's going to have a lasting benefit to Sri Lanka. If you look at the rest of their debt, it's just juggling money around to pay bills and settle finances. So there's a difference with it.
Sorry, guys. At this point in time, the neighbor's dog came over and started to sniff and play with Eamon, so we had to take a little pause. Anyways, back to the interview.
Russia's very much a part of it. I mean, the thing about it is, it's kind of operated by China, but it's kind of done differently. So, for example, if you look when the mining companies prior to World War I, Rio Tinto, owned by the Rothschilds, when they went to South America, they built railways because they needed the raw materials for the upcoming war. But when they built those railways, they went from the mine to the port. They worked for the locals. You understand? The point about this is that this is not like all roads lead to Rome. So, I mean, if you've got connections between Pakistan and Iran, that's between Pakistan and Iran. China just built it. They've got no involvement in that. So it's a very egalitarian sort of setup. Do you understand? It's not like everything has got to come back through China. Once they build the railways, it's for the local people. So it's a different setup. It's a different mindset. Um, it is basically the American system that was set up by Harry Carey, and Matt Ehret's done a huge amount of work on this. He talks about like what the original plan was under Lincoln to connect, the Trans-Pacific Railroad, going through Alaska, across the Bering Strait, linking into Russia, the land bridge. So the concept itself wasn't designed by China. This plan about like intercontinental railroads and connection, that goes back to literally the Lincoln times and Harry Carey. They borrowed it from that. And then if you look going back about 30 years, I think it was like 1989 when I saw Lyndon LaRouche in Bangkok talking about essentially the concept of the Belt and Road and why it made sense economically and everything. And prior to him delivering this talk in Bangkok, he delivered it in Beijing. So the concept has been there in a while. It was only the financial crash in 2008 that they decided to kick it into gear. But yeah, I mean, look, part of the problem that China has at the moment with the Belt and Road is that most of its partners who it's working with in these countries are all broke. Just like everybody else. I mean, most countries are effectively broke. Russia is not broke, but there are a few other countries that can say that. The model of the Belt and Road, and this is again one of the main differences, it relies on prosperity. They're building the infrastructure, in say Kenya, so that Kenya can, actually get access its resource and get them to market. That's in China's interest. The more prosperous Kenya is, the more Chinese products they make. So their model is not based like the empire model on keeping countries poor. It wants them to be rich. It wants everybody to be rich and prosperous. It wants America to be rich and prosperous. It's its biggest customer. It's got no interest in collapsing the American economy. Although it may do a few things now in retaliation for Taiwan that could seriously damage the American economy. They're going to carry on. The Belt and Road is going. Russia has a role as well. I mean, if you look at what they're doing about developing the east of Russia, I think you will probably see that everything that they're doing there ties into a master plan of future development where, everything basically links up. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's kind of like they're trying to economically link the world, but not so much culturally or politically. Do I have this right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can argue anymore that we're seeing a great schism where, Russia's already been isolated from the Western world. That's likely to continue. This is the Cold War 2.0 that they wanted. But, what's significant here now, I mean, for the first time, there's an alternative financial system that countries can use that doesn't take them to the dollar. So the system that they have set up with Russia and China right now, as they've said, look, this is open to any country to use and it's done discreetly. You don't make a big thing of it. If you read between the lines, because look, here's the coming financial crunch. This is what's really going to be the tipping point. You've got Sri Lanka, you've got Pakistan, you've got Ghana. These are countries that are essentially bankrupt, officially bankrupt, defaulted. Now they got a choice here. So if you look at Sri Lanka, the IMF have come in. All right, the IMF again, they've got their model. They're not changing. Privatization, cut government services, sell off industries. None of these things are going to do anything but exacerbate the problems that they've already got. The best they're going to do is get the IMF come in to keep lending them enough money so they can service the debt, so they don't default and trigger off this domino effect. Exactly the same as the The European Bank have been doing with Greece for what, 10, 12 years now. The decision these countries have to make is the IMF offer us no solutions. We've got food shortages, we've got energy shortages, we've got massive inflation. This is happening in every country in the world. Our societies are exploding. What are we going to do? Well, the IMF haven't got an answer that helps. Maybe the answer is to say, look, we're not rescheduling the debt or anything. We're defaulting. Nobody's getting anything. Okay. And then they start their new financial system under the umbrella of the Chinese Russian one. Now, there's 90 countries that are, according to the World Bank, are perilously close to default. Perilously close. That's going to be a decision they have to make, because the IMF are going to come in. It'll be exactly the same thing. Keep the system going for a little longer. Lend them enough money to service the debt. Not enough money to import foods. Not enough money to import energy. Nothing like that. That's the IMF model. It's basically a predatory system. It's not there to help. So that's going to be the big, I think, the big financial issue is what these countries do, when they admit default.
Well, living in Russia, I can tell you one thing. Very often the Russians are not too good at explaining themselves and their actions and plans, even to their own population. Not exactly the kings of marketing. So maybe could you enlighten us on what all these plans are? So what is this like Russian, Chinese banking, financial model alternative thing going to be? What is this all going to look like?
Well, the first thing about the model is they've got an alternative to SWIFT, so they can carry out international banking and transactions. But their model and the SWIFT model, near the twain shall meet. They're two completely separate, distinct models. The dollar is the big issue. The dollar having been the reserve currency, and the danger with a single reserve currency that's dominated by one country is it's abused. And the way that the dollar has been weaponized and sanctions, seizing assets and that sort of thing. As you can imagine, nobody but America likes that system, but that system is over. People have been trying to get away from it forever. But, you can look at Saddam Hussein trying to do business in the euro. You can look at Omar Gaddafi. Omar Gaddafi is trying to launch the gold-backed dinar, and well, it didn't work out well for them. The empire really doesn't have any sense of humor about this subject. One country, they would probably, if it was Sri Lanka in isolation, there'd probably be some sort of military solution there. But if you've got 90 countries defaulting and renouncing IMF debt all at once, it's not going to happen. And that could well happen. This could be the opportunity to break away. The principal thing is there isn't going to be, at least in the foreseeable future, one single reserve currency. So what we're seeing, for example, is we call the Central Asian states, Russia, Kazakhstan, China, Pakistan, they've all agreed on, a trading arrangement using reciprocal currencies based on a value. Now that works there. You can find big countries like Russia and China, okay, they can just pay each other in each other's currencies. That's not a problem. They can just use reverse currencies. You can do it with India because, again, these are big economies. Russia and Zimbabwe, for example, couldn't do that. There's such an imbalance in the money. So again, doing trade in reciprocal currencies wouldn't work there. There has to be some reserve medium of exchange. But Africa's setting up a currency. South America is setting up their own currency, the Merkel. Oh, no, that's the group. But they're setting up a Latin American trading currency. They're doing the same in Africa. So we're going to see people having trading arrangements and doing business in all kinds of different ways. What the world has no appetite for is another reserve currency that's completely dominated and controlled by one country. Nobody wants that. Nobody will accept that. The plan, obviously, the empire has, because they know the days of the dollar are numbered, is to replace it with some sort of CBDC, which they're probably going to do. They're probably going to get away with, despite the fact that most of the people don't want it. They're going to get away with it in Europe. They're going to get away with it in America, Canada. But nobody else in the rest of the world has got any appetite at all for another trading platform that America controls. So that's not going to happen. Once the dollar dies, the dollar system dies with it.
Dr. McKinney, could you tell us a little bit about the sort of the cross-cultural gap and all of this stuff about all of your deals that you had to make in China? Because I can tell you one thing, Russians can be really frustrating. I mean, everyone is so pessimistic about every project, but when it comes to what they want the project to sort of pay off, you know, their percent, their cut, oh, they're very optimistic, ridiculously optimistic. So it's tough doing business here. So anyways, what is it like dealing with the Chinese?
Well, I think the first mistake, and I mean, it extends beyond this particular topic, is that, you know, we all have our own logic, you know. So, I mean, you get a group of American businessmen who sit around the table and they come up with an idea for China, and it makes perfect sense to all of them, you know, appeals to their shared business logic. And the assumption is we're going to go to China and it'll obviously make sense to them because it's logical. Well, it's logical to you, you know, the assumption is based on a false premise that logic is the same everywhere. And there isn't. I'm sure that feeds into exactly what you said about doing business in Russia. One of the things that Western businesses don't understand, you know, they can talk about it. It's sort of an anecdote that they use that the Chinese believe in mutual benefit and win-win. It sounds like business speak, you know. You know, couched in another way, most Western businesses profess the same thing, but they don't mean it. I mean, when I was first in there, I mean, in the early days, when I was first involved in the business there, say 1980, that's what you used to hear all the time, mutual benefit, win-win, which I thought was just more business speak. You know, I didn't pay much attention to it. And it was interesting because just prior to that, I had 2 years in China and then a year back in the States doing an M.B.A. And the big read at the time that everybody was reading, everybody was talking about was The Art of War, you know, a 2,600-year-old book written by a Chinese general about conflict. And they use it to describe their attitude towards business. You know, it's all about winning and losing. Now, in all my years in China, I never heard a Chinaman using the art of war in any context whatsoever to do with business, because they don't consider business to be conflict. It is actually genuine. That's what they believe. You know, there's a saying in Chinese business, same bed, different dreams, is you and I are going to do business together and it's going to be good for both of us. But it's going to be good for you in one way and it's going to be good for me in another. You know what I mean? Right. As you get in every business relationship where it's a conflict and it's about winning or losing, you understand? It's kind of like the trading mentality on Wall Street. For every winning trade, there's a counterparty that loses. Business doesn't have to be like that. So they approach it in a very, very different way. Chinese organizational behavior in terms of how they run an organization is very much based on Confucian principles of a hierarchy, if you like. I mean, Confucius said that, you know, your average man is going to have 5 principal relationships in the course of his life. It's going to be emperor, subject, father, son, big brother, little brother, husband, wife, friend, friend. With the possible exception of friend, friend, all of those relationships implicitly, you know, entail one having authority over the other. The son looks up to the father, the younger brother looks up to the bigger brother. So their society is organized like that. But there's another side of that, you know, with that authority comes a responsibility. So It's the father's responsibility to look after the son, the big brother, the little brother. So the society sort of works up and down with a hierarchy of, authorities and responsibilities. So running a business in China is different because obviously you're using Chinese staff, Now it's changed today. They're a lot more organized along sort of traditional Western lines in terms of the way businesses are structured and everything, but it still has this inbuilt hierarchy in it, understanding China at a deeper level is necessary to be successful in China. And it doesn't happen, once you're there 2 weeks or 2 months or anything, you just get a feel for the place, you get an instinct, and that takes time, But American businesses have done very well in China. I've taken countless trade missions over there, and in terms of individual companies coming over, we're bringing them around, they're meeting potential partners and Chinese companies. Don't ever remember one of these meetings that didn't go well, where both sides liked each other. There was a dinner, there was fun, and the American side never go, hey, Jesus, you know what? They're not that different from us, and that's pretty much true. I mean, the business between America and China has been fractious really since Trump took office. So we're 6 years into that now. And that's made a very difficult situation for American companies, because they're under all kinds of pressure. The Chinese are hearing all these lies that are being told about. So it doesn't help relationships, let me put it like that. The other thing is, and this is why a lot of American companies are seriously rethinking it now, is look, China is not that cheap anymore. China's cost advantage is not low labor costs. I mean, you can go back to 5 years, 2017, Tim Cook said exactly the same thing. Apple are not in China because it's cheap. We're not there because of low labor costs. We're there because they can just do things quicker. And he gives an example of, they had a new line of iPhones or something going out, and they're already packed, ready to ship, thousands of them. And at the very last minute, they decided that there was something the matter with the screen. They needed to redesign and get a new screen before they could send them out. 2 weeks later, they all went out on schedule. That wouldn't be possible to do that in America. What people don't understand about China's economy and how it works, and put aside the political side of it, the democracy conversation. Just look at the economic model. It's got a state sector. The state sector takes care of the essentials. So you've got healthcare, medicine, infrastructure, energy. Right? These are state provided, so the costs are kept low. Now, these are not free. You pay for everything, but it's not expensive. So, I mean, a little while ago, 5 years ago, one of the clients was over, brought his wife, young kid. So a little girl, she's about 2.5, slips over, bangs her head. Anyway, in the middle of the night, she starts like vomiting and everything. So we rush her to the hospital, and she has to have a CAT scan. CAT scan was $26. Okay. So energy, for example, now the big state oil companies, they're the ones that, refine and sell the fuel, but there's a price cap. Okay. There's an energy price cap. So these industries are not supposed to lose money, but profit isn't their goal. So, as long as they're covered. Then what that is that means that if the essentials of life that everybody needs are available and affordable, they've got more disposable income to spend on other things. Now, if you compare that to like in the West, and we look at the cost of housing, we look at the cost of everything, you know. I mean, most Americans, could be making $200,000 a year, you'd be lucky to have $10 in your pocket at the end of the month. You know what I mean? Because just the very basic necessities of life take up so much of your income. That's bad for the economy because you don't get the consumption, you don't get the spending. And, when people have got a higher disposable income, they have more discretionary spending. And when they spend that into the economy, it has the multiplier effect. So that makes sense. But what the Chinese realized, and they realized this way before they started on, the reform program in 1980, was the communist model doesn't work. They'd already abandoned, collectivism, and a lot of the other principles. But the key point is this: communism, the way we saw it in Russia, for example, in the old days, was all about the class struggle. It was all about the distribution of wealth. That was never the issue in China. It was never about a class struggle. They've got their hierarchies that they understand already. No, it was about economics. So, China was never ideologically communist or Marxist in any way, apart from a few people at the top. So the point is, what they realized is you've got in order to distribute wealth, you've got to create it first. And the only thing that creates it is private enterprise. People do what they're incentivized to do. So the role of the state sector is not to compete with the private sector, it's to enable the private sector. So if you have a business, if you have a factory in China, okay, you know what you're going to be paying for your energy. You can calculate it. You've got the greatest infrastructure in the world for moving goods. You've got an industrial economy. And that's the point with it. China is very, very, very entrepreneurial. The state has a role. And obviously the big one is banking. All the big banks in China are state banks. The People's Bank of China, their central bank, isn't owned by the Rothschilds. Okay, they create their own money. They don't create their own money and lend it to themselves at compound interest. So they can do all kinds of things with that model that they can't do in America because you really don't have any state capital for investment. Everything is private, but it doesn't work. So I'll give an example about how they managed to do this infrastructure. So for example, I'm going back 15 years now. You've got the city of Shanghai and you've got the Yangtze Peninsula, and about 30 miles as the crow flies, you've got a big city called Nantong, population of about 10 million. To get from Nantong to Shanghai is about an 8-hour drive because you have to drive up the peninsula and down again. A nightmare of a drive. Anyway, so they built the Sutong Bridge. It was 15 miles, I think, across the Yangtze, the largest one of its kind in the world. That was a state-issued bond, okay, just for that project. It wasn't relating to anything else. The bond was issued to Suzhou on one side, Nantong on the other. 30-year bond, say, okay? Interest, but not compound interest. Your income is going to be from the tolls. That's your measurable, tangible income, okay? That's how they pay it back. It probably takes 30 years, doesn't show a great profit. You try to build that bridge in America, now you're talking about private capital. So you want to build a bridge across the Mississippi or something like that. It's going to cost untold billions. They fuck it up and it'll take years. But the problem is the amount of money that they have to put into it and the tolls that they collect, in time it will pay for itself, but it's too slow and it's too small a return to interest private capital in America. So the bridge doesn't get built. That's why you got no infrastructure. Back to the bridge in Sutong. Yes, we know, for example, 500,000 cars a day are going to use the bridge. All right, and it's going to be $5 a time. We know exactly how long it's going to take to pay it off. But the Chinese are not just looking at that. What they're looking at, the fact, is that it's saving 3 million hours a day driving. 3 million hours that could be put to some productive human pursuit. Cuts down on pollution. And the other thing about it is the GDP on both sides of that bridge have blown up. Okay. So there's other benefits that private capital can't monetize, like a growth in GDP, the saving in man hours, the reduction in pollution. China can. That bridge has already been, that debt has already been retired. They continue to collect the tolls. The GDP on both sides continues to flourish. And I believe they've subsequently built another tunnel under to do, to run alongside the bridge. So their economy works differently. And the interesting thing about it is if, again, we're seeing this coming divide with these bankrupt nations, if they choose to do a clean default, all right, and move to a new monetary system, they're also going to move to a different economic business model. And the model they're going to follow is China's model, because Americans look at China one way, but people in the rest of the world don't. China is a hero to these countries because they rid themselves of colonialization. They went from being a dirt poor nation to being a powerhouse, and they've raised the living standards of a billion people up until a decent, standard of living. They're going to follow that model because there's different kinds of capitalism. In the West, it's financial capitalism. There's no investment worth its name in the physical economy. It's all about playing with stocks and bonds and moving money around and what they call it, finance, insurance, real estate, equities or whatever. China has an industrial form of capitalism. It's different because when you invest like they did in Sri Lanka, that's an investment that's going to have all kinds of different returns and benefits for everybody. That's industrial capitalism. That's the model that Russia is following. That's the model Iran will follow. And increasingly what you'll see around the world is other countries doing that. China has shown them that, look, if you want to build infrastructure in your country, if you want to build a hydroelectric power plant, or you want to build an airport, you can create and do it with your own money, like we do. Okay. Now, obviously, there's a real danger with that. But if you tie it to some economic common sense, to a return, and you haven't got all manner of corruption, messing with it, then that can be done. So we're going to see that the industrial capitalist model taking over from the financial model.
Well, today we've been talking a lot about this economic shift from the West to the East. But one thing we can't forget is that pretty much, South Korea and Japan are very much integrated into the West. So in a lot of ways, we're talking about Southeast Asia, and especially those two countries, you could say maybe Singapore too, and to an extent Thailand. Is the Southeast of Asia, is it really in Asia financially or culturally or politically?
Well, all of those countries you mentioned have China as their biggest trading partner. Every country in the ASEAN regions, their biggest trading partner is China. Look, I will tell you that, and I'm not speaking about the governments of South Korea or Japan because they're essentially vassal states. But the majority of people in all of those countries do not see China as a threat. It's not the Asian way. China's assumed the role in Asia that everybody likes. Every time they see white men showing up in Southeast Asia with boats and guns, professing good intentions, bad stuff happens. The people in that region don't see China as the problem. They see America as the problem. And they certainly don't want NATO sticking their nose in that part of the world. That's a fact. South Korea is an interesting case. Now, South Korea and China do a huge amount of business together. So Pelosi went to South Korea after she went to Taiwan. All right, and the Prime Minister said, "No, I can't meet you. I'm on holiday." All right, all right. So take from that what you will. Japan is committing, among other things, economic suicide by siding with these sanctions against Russia. When it gets all its energy from Russia. And Japan has the highest GDP to debt ratio in the world. So, no, look, the situation in Asia is tense. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, an act of madness, which everybody in the region acknowledges, and they all reaffirm their commitment to the one China policy. People talk about Chinese aggression. And when you ask people for an example of this Chinese aggression, they can't give you one. Because in 5,000 years, China's never invaded or tried to colonize another country. It's just not what they're about. Talk about Chinese aggression. I would talk about 70 years of Chinese restraint, because the Americans have been trying to stir this crap up since 1950. That's a fact. So you've had 70 years of provoking China to try and get them to do something against Taiwan, to give them an excuse. That's a level of restraint that's never been witnessed in history before. Now, here's kind of I'm going to backtrack a tiny bit and I'll get back to that. Order out of chaos, that's the motto of these people. That's how they do business, the Hegelian dialect. Create chaos, wait for the reaction, provide the solution you wanted. 9/11, the Patriot Act, the justification for the Middle East wars, all of this. History is littered with this. Their model is order out of chaos. They are trying to create chaos everywhere in the world. And you can go back through history from the French Revolution, the American Civil War, the both World Wars. Their hands are all over it. They thrive on chaos. That's a fact. And when they employ that Hegelian dialect, there's an action. It relies on a predictable reaction. Like after 9/11, everybody got Islamophobic, patriotic and patriotic and everything. But the problem is, the people are wise to that game. Putin didn't react the way they thought he was going to. He didn't fight the war they were expecting. He didn't handle it the way it was expected. And furthermore, 150 countries around the world didn't react the way that they were expected. They said, no, we're not joining in these sanctions. We know what this is about. Similarly, and Chinese are masters at strategy. If you go, we visit Sun Tzu for a moment. So never interfere with your enemy when he's busy destroying himself. All right. And there's another quote in there that set your tents by the river and soon you'll see the bodies of your enemies floating by. What America was doing with this provocation was hoping that they'd shoot the bitch down, which from what I gather would have been just about fine with most people in America. But anyway, they're not going to do that. They know that if they play your game, you're going to win. China has got so many things it can do to damage America. It controls the rare earth industry. Without Chinese rare earths, any kind of tech manufacturing will shut down in the West, particularly in America. 85% of all the pharmaceuticals and their precursors that are consumed in America come from China. Now, could you imagine if they decided to cut that off? We're talking zombie apocalypse. That's the tip of the iceberg. America is so dependent on things from China, any number of things. They're just two examples. They're just putting export license on them. That's already put an export license, so therefore it needs special permission to be exported. It means China decides who gets the rare earths. Pharmaceutical, they're now considered of strategic value, so they need an export license. Anything that goes into or could be used in military manufacturing in America now requires an export license, so they can determine on the basis of somebody applying without license, no, they can't have it. And the disruption that would cause. I mean, when Trump came out and started saying we're going to put sanctions on this and sanctions on that, I mean, he was performing for the crowd. But I mean, what a dumbass. I mean, what he did slowed down the Chinese, putting a prohibition on China buying chips from America. So straight away, America lost like $50 billion a year on that alone. And they developed their own chip industry. So it slowed them down a bit. But America needs China. It wouldn't function without it. China doesn't need America. Doesn't need America and buy crappy fucking GM soya beans from everywhere. You know what I mean? The only thing we wanted, you said we couldn't have. So fuck it. You wonder why you got a trade deficit. You know? So anyway, China is not going to respond the way they think it's going to respond. You know? And if China retook Taiwan, okay, I would expect the same thing to happen as happened when they tried to sanction Russia. The usual suspects, they'll sanction China and nobody else will.
So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you like the opinions coming out of my big fat mouth, then join up on my Telegram channel. That's Tim Kirby Hardcore on Telegram. Link, of course, in the description.